Well, good evening, everyone, and good evening to all our viewers who are joining in with us right now. Welcome to this special webinar conducted by SLIM Sri Lanka, the Sri Lanka Institute of Marketing, on a very timely topic given the current circumstances in the world and in Sri Lanka. Welcome to this special webinar titled Attune Your Services in a Crisis, Key Factors in Retaining Your Customers in the Services Industry. So today we'd like to touch base on a few factors that contribute onto the service sector in Sri Lanka and how important it is to actually give so much attention to the service sector in Sri Lanka and why it is important, how it is important, and what's the way forward given the current circumstances in Sri Lanka and also in the country. So today we have with us three speakers joining to give you a brief and very comprehensive update and an overview of how things have been, of how things are, and what's the way forward. Because as we all know, the service industry plays a big role in today's world, given the current advancement of technology and given the current circumstances of COVID-19, which is partly why Slim Sri Lanka has also organized this virtual webinar and that we're coming to you live and we're streaming to you live as we speak right now. So today we have three very influential speakers joining with us to talk about a few factors contributing to the service sector in Sri Lanka. And first up we have Mr. Dileep Mudadeniya, who is the Vice President, Marketing and Events, Cinnamon Hotels and Resorts, and also the Head of Corporate Affairs at John Keels PLC, together with Mr. Tharaka Ranwala, Senior Deputy General Manager, Consumer Banking at Sampath Bank, and also Tharanga Gunasekara, Head of Marketing and Communications at HSBC Sri Lanka. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the webinar.
Good evening.
Very good evening. All right, to kick things off, I'd like to quickly introduce to you each of these speakers one by one. First, we have Mr. Dileep Mudadeniya, who is the Head of Marketing and Events at Cinnamon Hotels and Resorts, and also the Vice President at John Keels Group. Now, he has many years of experience in travel, tourism, communications, strategic planning, and he is the founder of Center for Research and Sustainability Studies. He was the founder and former head of Quality Standards, first Managing Director of Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion Bureau, and the Additional Director General of the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority, in charge of licensing, investment, legal, and special projects. Mr. Mudadeniya possesses a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Colombo and an attorney at law and a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Marketing. Chartered marketer Dileep also holds an MBA in marketing. Now, also we have with us this evening Mr. Tharaka Ranwala, who is the Senior Deputy General Manager at Consumer Banking of Sampath Bank PLC, who is responsible for overseeing many areas including operations, deposit mobilization, marketing and retail banking, business of the bank, and including the branch network. Mr. Ranwala is a fellow of CIM UK and a member of SLIM himself. He possesses a postgraduate diploma in marketing and is a chartered marketer himself. He's also a certified professional marketer, CPM, of the Asia Pacific Marketing Federation and has obtained an advanced diploma in credit management from the College of Banking and Finance, Institute of Bankers of Sri Lanka. Currently, Mr. Ranwala is the president of the International Advertising Association Sri Lanka and also a board member of the CSR Sri Lanka Guarantee Limited, which is the apex body for promoting CSR initiatives in Sri Lanka. Lastly, we also have Mr. Tharanga Gunasekara joining with us this evening. Mr. Tharanga, currently the head of marketing and communications for Sri Lanka and Maldives with HSBC, one of the largest international banks. He is a member of the country executive committee, and he has over 15 years of experience in the financial services and overall over 25 years of experience in the marketing function in industries which include consumer goods and pharmaceuticals. He has worked abroad and overseas with stints with HSBC India and HSBC Indonesia as well. Mr. Gunasekara is also equipped with a postgraduate diploma from SIM, UK, SLIM, Sri Lanka, and was the first double diplomate in the country. He's a chartered marketer and has an MBA from the University of Leicester in the United Kingdom. So it's a pleasure to have all three of you gentlemen here with us this evening. Thank you very much for sparing your time and joining with us and making some contribution as much as possible, given the current time, given these trying times, as much as you can. So firstly, I'd like to begin this evening's program with Mr. Dileep Mudadeniya. Mr. Mudadeniya, firstly, let's go over a few questions. Firstly, I'd like to ask you, how would you define services marketing with your experience?
Yeah, I think it's there are many definitions into this, but if you just ask me a little bit of time, in 1980s, when the service industry actually came into more active part of the economies and people are looking at it, shifting from product marketing into what we call service marketing. That was the birth of that. So just if you try to get a kind of a very short answer or definition, it is basically a certain amount of actions, benefits, and a creation of certain satisfaction, which is associated with a sale. So it can be a product that you're selling, but something, if it is something like after sales service, that's going to be more intangible service that's going to create. So that's basically a very short definition. But there'll be about four key characteristics of a service marketing. One is actually the intangibility. You can't touch and feel this. The second one is the variability, because one service level is different to another service that you're depending on what you do. Selling a room, the services associated with that is still totally different from somebody's coming and opening a bank account in a bank. Then the third one is perishability, because if you don't necessarily sell a room on a certain day, you will find that the next day it doesn't really exist. So there's an opportunity cost. And the fourth one is actually inseparability. You can't separate it from one another. It's all linked to from a sale or from anything else that you do, the sale with the service and sales. Those are actually the four key characteristics of that. So based on that, what is really highlighted in most places today, in most schools, etc., taught is the intangibility of this particular element. So that in hotels and tourism, we call it actually basically something you're going to buy something without knowing what it is. So this is basically a short answer which I can give you. It's an activities, benefits, and also basically targeting a certain amount of satisfaction which is associated with the sales is currently can be defined as a service marketing.
Also, Mr. Mudadeniya, now we understand that given these times, customer satisfaction is something that is very, very important, even before these times, during these times, even in the future. It's something very important at all times. So customer service is key for an organization such as any organization in hospitality or tourism. So can you explain the importance to mature and monitor customer satisfaction and the quality of service?
And the quality of the service is something very, very important. There is a principle, as we all heard, something called serve call, which is something which is started by Professor Parasuraman. And basically the serve call principle has been established very clearly for each and every industry and each and every sector in the service marketing. So this is something, reason is that you are buying something which you can't touch and feel. In tourism, we call it, we are selling dreams. So that's what we call, we are selling a dream for somebody to actually realize it when they come in. So before they come into a hotel or a room, they have certain pre-expectations on that. So basically we have you have seen the birth of certain businesses around it. If you look at the multi-billion-dollar business TripAdvisor, it actually revolves around this entire referrals. So people like to see what type of experience which the other person has got by trying this particular service, and that is called referral marketing. So the birth of referral marketing, and in the birth of internet, and then actually development of IT and the technology, this became a huge business. In travel and tourism world, we call it, there are referral sites, there are aggregators, something like Revinet, where they actually pull in all the comments from various parts of the world and different languages and give you one single dashboard what people are saying about your brand. So that basically allows the consumer to look at what we are saying. That also allows us to improve and target it if there's something wrong somewhere to fix it, so that actually before it become an issue in the social media, and we can actually quickly trace it. And this is also part of what we call social listening. If your name is written and coming out for negative reasons, many times you can quickly move in and try and negate the situation so that it doesn't have an impact. So in that context, all the comments that people have made and the various sites that actually highlighted the service marketing elements are going to be very, very critical, because what you're going to do is basically a reflection of what people are going to comment on it. And a word of mouth is very critical for a brand, especially if you're a service marketing, because credibility of understanding and believing that is very, very high. So if you're especially on the business of selling dreams, you need to make sure that your dream is actual to what you dream of.
All right. Now, Mr. Mudadeniya, we are in December 2020, almost in December. It's almost at the verge, we are almost at the verge of completing 1 year since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot has been happening, a lot has changed. We are slowly adapting, a lot's at stake, and a lot of the industries in Sri Lanka and the world are adapting. I think we are constantly in the process of adapting. Businesses are constantly in the process of adapting to knowing that, okay, this might persist for some time. How do we get about it? How do we be normal or act normal or adjust to this new normal that we have? Because we really don't know when COVID-19 can actually become worse or even better in the future. So given these current circumstances, given the trying times that Sri Lanka is facing right now, even through the second wave of the pandemic, it has affected over the past few months, since last November, since last December, it has affected businesses, loss of revenue, redundancies, and loss of customers. So during these time, what do you think should change? How do you think we should retain a customer or our customer base?
Yeah, I think the COVID actually taught us a very, very important lesson. That's basically physical distance. The importance of having the distance physically, but it didn't tell us to distance your brand. While it taught us to distance the physically distance, the brand distance was never there. So we have seen actually something like, very famous chain in Europe called Manger. And what they did actually immediately after a while, some of the brands, famous brands, actually I didn't want to mention names, but closed down in the operations completely. They actually created something unique. They did something called COVID menus. They opened up all their restaurants near the health centers and actually created very effectively immediately after a delivery service. And this actually struck the heart of their business of all the people around. This was actually able to highlight it as a very, very strong brand. And they actually immediately after, once the things were open, they saw a huge growth, almost 20 to 30% growth in their business outlets, because the equity that actually they generated out of it, the positive mindset, really had an impact on their businesses. This is what we call actually not to create any brand distance. So it's very important that during this time, while we may take all the precautions, it's very important the financial management of this. Cash is king. While all that is there, we know that all pandemics are going to stay longer. It will 1 day, 2 years, maybe 3 years, it will go out. The business will be back to normal. So at that case, we need to make sure that your brand is actually not distant from the crowd or from the target audience, and not to waste a crisis. We call it in John Keels. We have a motto saying that let's not waste a crisis. This is an opportunity for us to develop your product further or a service further, develop your make a connection, very strong connection to their segmentation, the target that you're basically targeting to. So this is very important from that perspective. And if you look at it, I mean, we can take from Cinnamon Hotel's perspective. That's why we quickly move in. We saw the necessity of compensating, at least recognizing the health workers. At that point, we came with free rooms that we gave for the lot of health workers, while the objective was to make sure that they have a good time. It's the CSR work, but also in the same time, the spillover on that effect was that they got a lot of positive credibility for the brands. And this is also a time, and a lot of brands, they actually look at it, try and build the brand when they're in a crisis. You can't build a brand when you're in a crisis. Building the brand and the equity and the positive mindset is a long-term thing. You need to keep on building it at a certain point. When something negative comes in, your positivism of the brand equity can absorb the certain amount of negativism and say people start rejecting that. For example, today when you say that one person was stabbed to death in Iraq, we basically think that that's quite normal. But if the same incident happened in Switzerland, I'm not talking about the rest of the activities, but in Switzerland, currently like that, where somebody has really killed another person, it says, can it be? Same incident, but the perception is different. So this is a time that you build perception, positive equity, and that cannot be done by just communication. As a reputation that you earn, so earning the reputation is basically that this is the time that you need to build and earn the reputation so that you can become a stronger brand by doing certain actions on ground. So therefore, it's true, it's very difficult. First thing to go is the marketing budgets, because we call waste management. It's true that your revenues are not the same, but what we need to understand is that your decision makers, all the CEOs, etc., is that this is not going to stay for a long time. We have earned in the past using the same name, same brand, etc. There's a certain amount of activity building that needs to be done, getting closer to the customers and make sure that we add value to them. We basically become relevant to them so that we have in the certain value chain, we constantly actually creating that proposition that is required by the target audience. So the brands can do this, and service marketing can play a huge role in that.
Absolutely, Mr. Mudadeniya. I think no matter how significant this problem may be, still we will come out of this, and at the end of it, we need to be in a stable position to actually keep on our businesses, keep going, keep moving forward, and at the end of which we need to be in a stable position as well. So that was a very comprehensive answer. Thank you very much, Mr. Mudadeniya. And last question to you in your time slot. Now, technology, science, it's in a rapid state of evolving. And we as humans, we've evolved in ways that we cannot imagine. The needs and wants of people have gone through so much of change, so much complexity and complications. And now we're in a state, if you really think about it, humans are more or less never satisfied with what they have. They want more because they have that option. They want more, they need more. So these needs and wants have evolved over time, and these needs and wants have complicated themselves, and humans are always in a state of wanting something more, something better. So in terms of satisfying various segments, and together with that comes the difference in age groups and how different people want different things at different times. So in terms of satisfying various segments in the markets for age groups, how do you satisfy all generations in the market? If you can give us an example as well.
Yeah, so I think if a brand is to try to satisfy doing everything for everyone, then that could be a failure for a brand. The brand should really focus and understand what is the reason for you to be. It's called raison d'etre of the brand. There's a reason that the brand lives, and that needs to be understood. That's called the purpose of the brand. So if you don't understand the purpose of the brand, then it's very difficult for you to create that differentiation and drive and then make relevance and necessity the impact for the target audience. So the first thing you should do is in a brand is that, or if you're in a service marketing, to understand what is the purpose of what you're in the business. And if that purpose is still relevant, and if that purpose is still good, and then that you are in business. So within that process, while you are understood, you will be able to segment the market in various ways. There are very few brands that that can serve from an age group of 1 to 65 or 1 to 80. If there are such brands, of course, there are very, very few, but you can't really serve such a stretch along that. But hospitality is one area that you can have such a large stretch. Banking could be another area as well. So you are starting from an adult and going till 60, 70. So if I just tell you the example of cinnamon, the brand purpose is the core purpose of cinnamon is inspired living, which means that creating of inspiring moments. Every moment that is necessary for the customers that are coming in. Now, this is since creation of inspiring moments can be different from person to person. If I tell you example, one person who was going to the airport one day arrived at the airport and to found that the passport that person has left in the room, and to see that one of our staff was going in a vehicle and half an hour later handing over the passport to the passenger, saying that you have left it and we came all the way over 150 kilometers, give it to you, that you won't actually miss the flight. Now that is an inspiring moment for that person who's actually coming out of one of our hotels and see a foreigner or see a nice lizard somewhere very close by, and a cleaner showing them this is a lizard, can get inspired on that. So the level of inspiring is basically different. So our training basically teach people on giving that freedom that is required to understand how to make a person happy, and what can be a very small thing to something big as going to the airport and following that, or small as showing a small animal around the corner. So this is what we call how do you make relevant to understand the customer and create a theme, or to understand creating a purpose of the brand which is relevant to the audience. If the purpose of the brand is relevant to all the audiences, then through the activation of understanding your internal communication, you build a brand touch points to make sure that this is delivered to all age groups that are coming in. Now, today's day and age group segmentation is getting old and outdated. As person, today I saw an app the other day where you actually see a weight of a person. When you get the weight, it gives you actual age, and it gives you actually your mental age. Yeah, after actually calculating onto your body mass and said, okay, you are now 10 years old or 10 years younger. So in that case, the young at heart kind of concept exists. So people behave in a certain way, not at the age group. So we need to understand this new development in lifestyle business. So that's why a lot of brands are becoming lifestyle brands, moving away from service, moving away from product. They want to become part of their lifestyle. So as far as you understand your purpose, the purpose is stay relevant, and then relevance can be activated through various mechanisms by activating or giving the purpose to the internal customer. Then that's how you start adding value and stay relevant to your core purpose. So that's the answer I can give you, how a brand can stay relevant to the identified audience through the core purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Mudadeniya. I think for now, we'll take a small break from your questions. Thank you very much for all that insightful answers. I think we'll be back with you for the rapid fire session right after we go through Mr. Tharaka Ranwala and Mr. Tharanga Gunasekara. Thank you very much, Mr. Mudadeniya. Up next, I'd like to move on to Mr. Tharaka Ranwala, and I have a few questions from you as well. Now, Mr. Ranwala, Sri Lanka has evolved it has gone through tumultuous times, and it has evolved and advanced in many ways, and the service sector plays a very major role in today's world, in today's context of Sri Lanka. Almost by 2019, I believe the service sector contributed to the GDP around 58%, and it has constantly been contributing by around 55 to 58% over the last 4 to 5 years. So in this current context, in the current circumstances, given what is happening, what do you think is the best way, is the best method to keep a brand image safe in regards to the services provided?
Thanks, Dilena, and welcome everybody to this session. It's a very interesting question, Dilena. Keeping the brand image safe, especially at a time like this, and especially when you're in the service industry, it's a tough call. But my straightforward answer, before I try to explain it in detail, my straightforward answer is to be truthful to the brand and to the consumer all the time. That is the best method to keep your brand image safe. Nothing else. There is no shortcut, right? See, I think it's important for us to understand the role that the brand image plays in a company. A lot of the time, a lot of non-marketers especially don't value the brand image. Coming from a banking sector, working with assets and liabilities all the time, we always see that the balance sheet although it has assets and liabilities, the brand image is not taken in its true context. However, brand image is the most valuable asset in a company. If you have a strong brand image, it can help you or your company to flourish and thrive. But at the same time, if you have a poor brand image, it can even lead to the demise of the even strongest corporations. I think this is the fundamental ethos of what happens in companies and in around us, and we need to understand that. So coming back at a time where you have online world pressing against you and you have social media and all that, it's a challenging task to keep the brand image safe. So I in my opinion, I think you need to look at probably 4 things. 1, control your logo. That's number 1, right? Trademark mark registrations, legalizing it, and having that brand logo to yourself and safeguarding it, I think the first and foremost thing. Then if you look at it, you need to be very quick in resolving complaints. That is your point number 2. Don't let customers' concerns and customers' little problems grow into hurricanes. Attend to it fast. Now, this is some of the things that we miss, these basics, right? We find a very small customer complaint or a irritation of a customer, we let it be, and then it gradually becomes a thunderstorm. Don't ever do that. Point number 3, keep a close eye on the social media. Very tough, very difficult, but that is what you need to do in this day and time. It's a balancing act, right? You need to keep an eye on what is saying about you, how things are moving, what is coming on, and then you need to start making sure that your brand stays within that. And the last one, in my opinion, is use technology to monitor the chatter about your brand in a sort of a unconventional method. I would say this is what you call the Lindalanga gossip kind of story. Today, in this day and age, right, you need to actually know what people talk about your brand, right? You use a tool like maybe Google Alerts, use listening tools, but you need to be a step ahead of everybody else and make sure that your brand, what people talk about it, leverage on the positives, make sure you address the negatives. I think these 4 points to me, Thilina, would be the sort of the areas that you need to focus on to keep the brand image safe. Although it's tough, I think this is what marketers need to do.
Absolutely. I think I think that plays a huge role in today's day and age, especially given the current circumstances and what we are facing when it comes to customers. A lot of things happening and a lot of complications may arise. So it's better to always keep that edge and keep that buffer so that you're safe on the line. Now, Mr. Ranwala, we know that with this new day and age and with what has been happening so far, communication plays a gigantic role in today's business, in today's lives, in everything. Basically, it's that small little things of how you communicate, what you communicate, and what sort of information is given to our customers or to anyone, what sort of information is transferred between 2 parties, 3 parties. This is very important in today's day and important in business and marketing as usual. So in your opinion, I would like to ask you, in order to connect or keep that connection with existing or new customers, what do you think or what do you propose is the most official method of communication given the current circumstances? If you can give an example also.
Okay, Thilina, I think it's again a very timely question. However, permit me to sort of take a step back and answer it just giving a little elaboration first. Both myself and Tharanga, I think Tharanga will also agree with me, work in the banking industry. because we are working in the banking industry, in this communication, when we start talking about Tilana, we need to actually look at one element where you have communication that the banks do with their customers to keep them connected from a banking perspective. Now that, whether you are in the age or time of this, that cannot change, because the banking communication to the customer on their banking functionalities has to remain within the bank's accepted forms of communication. Now, if I sound a little bit confusing, let me try to explain. At a time like this, you see almost all the banks give communications to their customers saying, "Dear customer, we never ask you for your PIN number. We never ask you for your account details through a SMS or just an email coming from a random email address. For those communication, we use a designated and an authenticated email and communication methodology." Now, that is what I'm talking about. So being in the banking service business, we need to distinguish these two. The communication to our customers on a banking needs, keeping them connected on the banking lines, we will continue to use the authenticated methodologies. For example, Sampath Bank has Sampath Vishwa, which is the internet banking. We use Sampath Vishwa authenticated mail to the customer, and they're supposed to respond through that. Then we have customer care center with the dedicated numbers, and when somebody inquires something, we call back, verify certain things, and then give the information out to them. I think that part, whether we are in a pandemic or a situation like this, will not change. It is how the global operations of banking takes place. Then comes to the second part, where we as bankers, we communicate and connect our customers for the products and services that we have, and we drive them through this whole brand experience perspective. Now, the simple answer to that, in today's day and age, I think the communication methodology has to be a combination of both digital as well as traditional marketing. Especially so, now my learned colleague of Tharanga, who is there, who caters to probably bigger number of digital savvy people, unlike Sampath Bank, which is a mass market brand and serving the masses, we have both digital savvy and not so digital savvy. So we need to use both digital communication as well as traditional communications of ATL, BTL, PTL, PR, and whatever there is. However, I think the essence of the communication goes back to your first question. All of us, in order to take note as well as to connect and keep our consumers with us, we need to be truthful to our brand and do truthful communication. One. Two, I think especially at a time like this, people are very concerned about socially connected brands. So we need to communicate. While we communicate our products and services and the platforms to operate and the features or various things what we have, we need to show the social side of us as well. So in order to do that, use of both digital marketing techniques and traditional marketing techniques needs to be done depending on the kind of target audience that you as a brand and as a company is targeting. So I would say it's a combination of both, but maybe tilted more towards digital because we are more attuned to it than before this pandemic.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mr. Ranwala. And now when it comes to services, it's obvious that there are intangible and tangible services. Now, drawing your attention on to some intangible and intangible service. Now, how do you think new services, how can new services be designed and tested effectively when the service is essentially an intangible process?
Again, a very timely question, and I think it's very relevant to banks because we don't have a tangible product, we provide a service. However, see, I think that is where the tough job of both marketers as well as business operational people in the banks have to face when you are in the service industry. Our product testing has to be done on the go, right? We need to run it, see how it is, and make sure you you do alterations as you go on. I'll give you one example. When we had the first pandemic and we had a complete lockdown, one of the key things that a lot of people face was that you had your food trucks or your grocery vendors or your online things happening, right? For the online things, people were ready with their cards, they had electronic money, so they were able to do. But what happens when a guy keeps walking in, or rather this essential services guy come to your doorstep and you want to buy some bananas, some mangoes and little stuff? So people wanted cash. For that, they needed to go to the ATMs. During this time, is first time in the country, Sampath Bank launched actually a service to our customers, where the customer had a choice to select creating an own transaction to him to get the cash through PickMe to your doorstep, right? Now, when we did this, actually, Thilina, this was done, I think it took me about 48 to 72 hours, 48 hours of which was sleepless to get approvals and all that. But within that 72 hours, we first launched Colombo 1 to 10, not even others. And we launched it through that. And within the first 7 days, we tested the run with the issues, the complications, the hiccups for Colombo 1 to 10. And while that was being done, one team was doing the rectification of issues, right? Which was very little, but there was another team working with PickMe to have drivers assigned for Colombo 10 beyond, plus suburbans of Mount Devala, Mount Lavinia, Kotte, Maharagama, Wattala, the suburbans. We were able to, after the first 10 days, we were able to expand it to the suburbans, simply because we did it on the run. So we had to do it that way, right? I'll give you a classic example. The first time when a person did the transaction, again, another thing that we did was the hotline number was directly handled by myself and for one day, I think it was the managing director. So we directly got the calls. I can still remember the first guy who did the transaction. He said, transaction done. I can't see whether the PickMe guy is coming to me. How do I know that? You see, now that is a typical question, because you're used to running PickMe and you're seeing it through Google. So these things come, right? So you need to pacify the customer. See, it's unlike a food that you get. You pay $600 and you're waiting for a delivery, but it's a completely different thing when you ask somebody else to pick up your 2,500 rupees, right? So these things have to be done that way, Thilina. So I think that's the tough challenge that we have. And on a lighter note, this is why I always keep saying bank marketers is a breed of its kind. So they need to do a lot of roles. With all due respect to other marketers, I'm not saying they're not, but the breed is very different. So you need to do these things that way. So I think that is what a marketer, if you are in the banking or financial sector, you have to do it on the go.
Absolutely, Mr. Ranwala. I think given the outbreak of COVID-19, it has been a wake-up call to most people to integrate businesses, integrate services, and change in how you see things, how you do things, and how you look at things. Especially now that you said this was a new service that was introduced by Sampath Bank, and it took you almost 48 to 72 hours to mobilize this. You could see people coming together and arranging something new to our customers, so that they also convenience is the most thing, because you want to retain your customer, and convenience plays a huge role, and you want to give that to the customer. So COVID-19 was in one way a wake-up call, and now that you've integrated that part of your business, okay, in a few months, if something like this happens, we know what to do. So we have, in fact, taken that step so that we know what to do in a few months' time, or in a few years' time, or something like this hits in the future, so that convenience is at the customer's doorstep. And like you said, it's not like you're ordering food off PickMe or something else. It's literally you're asking for money. So how is that person going to keep track of that money coming to him, and where is he right now? Those are little hiccups that were at the start could be turned into different ways of integrating and how you can make it better. So thank you very much, Mr. Ranwala, for that comprehensive overview of how you see things from a Sampath Bank PLC point of view. Thank you very much. Up next, I'd like to move into Mr. Tharanga Gunasekara, and I also have a few questions to you, Mr. Gunasekara. To start off, I'd like to ask you, how can a service be different when comparing with local and international markets or clients? And are there any areas to consider or improve?
Yeah, hi, Dilna. Firstly, thanks, huge thanks to Slim for inviting me. And I'm really delighted to be amongst two good friends, Dileep and Tharaka, my two good buddies. Yes, Tharaka, we've been missing that Lindalanga Sangamaya chats lately. Unfortunately, social distancing doesn't allow us to do that. Anyway, having said that, I think just to kind of kick off things, I think we need to put it into context. And I think we are absolutely, you might probably think we are in unprecedented times. I would probably like to disagree with that, because humanity has seen worse. And if you look at one word that all of you guys out there need to take out is the word resilience. And the reason I say that is because the current pandemic is what we are seeing in our lifetime. But did you know in 1918 and 1920, we had a similar pandemic. So there's a wave 1, which killed about 5 million people globally. And the same thing happened with wave 2, and 50 million died. 500 million plus got infected. And this was the Spanish flu. And did you know in Sri Lanka, which is quite interesting, we also had 300,000 deaths. And it was marginalized to a belt from Colombo to Trincomalee. No one in Galle or Jaffna knew that there was a pandemic. Really interesting read. but really, coming back to the question in terms of differentiation locally and globally. So I think basically it's about the complexity of the market. So if you take a country like a developing country like Sri Lanka, we have a technological challenge. We have a human capital challenge. We have quite a few challenges. Now, if you take, for example, during the lockdown, the first lockdown, I think majority of us basically had to confine ourselves to home, and we had to work from home. And you should ask the question, were you enabled to work from home? And the answer would probably be yes or no. So I think in a developing country like Sri Lanka, we can't mobilize 100% of our workforce to work from home. But if you take the West, 100% can be mobilized from home. I mean, there are certain companies that encourage everyone to work from home, and that really has some benefits, right? So your real estate costs are low, your air conditioning, your electricity, everything's really taken off. So technology is one aspect that really divides the have and the have not. So I think in a country like Sri Lanka, we had that challenge. And then I think from a service industry, and coming back to the industry that I'm in, financial services, one of the critical aspects is we are still a cash-led economy. I'm sure Tharaka probably would shed more light, because that's the type of customers that I think a bank like Sampath Bank has. Also, a lot of our transactions still happen in cash. I mean, and I think the plastics are really slowly but surely penetrating. But I mean, if you take number of credit cards, less than 10% of our population have a credit card in their wallet. So what does that mean? So I think classic example to what Tharaka said. So when we were confronted with this whole lockdown, and when a small timer came in some bananas or fruits and vegetables, we had to have cash. And believe me, I called Tharaka and said, Madan, can you help my customers with your mobile, ATM? I mean, that's the kind of, the connections we have in the industry. So that's reality, because I think we are in a state where we are. But I think the good news is that after the lockdown, a lot of us resolved, a lot of us kind of moved into, like what example some of the two speakers mentioned, we basically kind of moved into a different end game. And that is digitalization, right? So I'd like to give you some examples kind of as we go along, but I hope that answers your question in terms of what's really different in local and international markets.
Of course, Mr. Gunasekara, I think a part of what you said was very much true, actually, because of the current given circumstances and how it has been over time since the lockdown was imposed, and how we needed to integrate ourselves to digitalization and being going through with this new normal of being digitalized. So my next question would also be on the same lines. Now, like you said, lockdown was imposed in March for 2 months and everything froze, but still there were essential services like banking and financial services that needed to operate even amidst of all the restrictions. So at a time like that, how do you plan customer campaigns during this time or over the year, within the span of this year? How do you plan customer campaigns in situations like this?
Right. So go back to, I'd like to go back to that little kind of conversation start I kicked off with, resilience. If you're a bank, you win the trust of the consumer. And at no point can you let that consumer down. Be the lockdown. I mean, Sri Lanka had 2 black swans events, right? So, I mean, 1 year prior to this, we had Easter attacks, and similar situation, kind of came about. And then we had the lockdown. So I think basically a campaign is a campaign, but I think let me kind of give you a little context. I think because there's quite a few different audience in terms of multiple stakeholders. I think let me go to the basics, the consumer. So if we really look at what happens in a lockdown and what really happened during the lockdown, I think we had our consumers. I mean, this is how we looked at from a bank. Our consumers or our customers, there was a loss of income. There was fear of infection. People didn't want to get out because they were fearful for their families and themselves. And there's reduced mobility. So people couldn't really move about. I mean, that's why businesses like Dileep's really got impacted. And then more importantly, I think what really happened was there's a changing shopping behavior. So we as a kind of brand or a bank had to kind of attune to these trending change. So if you look at Kantar research, that was really done, fantastic piece of research done by Kantar. I think they basically established the fact that consumers were tightening their belts during the pandemic. So basically they were taking 2 decisions. One, they were deferring certain decisions, and they were not deferring certain decisions. And that's really what's really interesting to think about. So if you look at some of the decisions they deferred, it was about going on a vacation overseas. The airport was shut. No way you can go on a vacation. And then looking at luxury purchases, they deferred that. They really didn't really need to do that. But if you take what they didn't defer, they still thought about banking. They still thought about savings. They still thought about investing. They still thought about insurance, because what if, right? Insurance is all about what if. What if happens to me? Who's going to take care of my family, right? So these things didn't really happen. So as a brand, if you're looking at from a campaign point of view, I think as a brand during this kind of crisis, you got to be authentic, you got to be practical, and you have to be a trusted friend, a trusted friend. I mean, that's really important, especially when it comes to banking. So you can basically either take 2 different polars. You can basically establish yourself in 2 polars. One is you can be a hero or you can be a villain. And this is not what you want to be, but this is how the consumer sees you. So during a crisis, only the true the brand self comes out. So either you are seen as a hero or a villain. So essentially, there's a really interesting piece of work done saying, okay, during a crisis, should you go dark? Meaning, should you stop all your advertising? I think Tharaka and Dileep also alluded to this. Research showed that if you went dark with your campaigns or your brand or your advertising, there is a potential loss of about 13% volumes that can impact your sales. So this is clearly established. So basically, what I like to now share is, okay, what did we do? Okay, this is all what really is out there, but what did we do as a brand, as an international brand, and a brand that has been in Sri Lanka for 128 years. We established in 1872, and we are a brand that is 150 years. You can imagine we have seen 2 world wars, we've seen that Spanish flu, we've seen this pandemic. So it's resilience at its best. We've seen it all. So basically what we did was, we changed course, because we can't do the same thing we do from a campaign perspective. So we had to kind of change gear, change the track. So globally, we did something really interesting. So all the markets we're in, where we have a presence, had a 3R approach. So all our campaigns basically took on what we call a 3R approach. First, we reacted. Secondly, we responded. And thirdly, we rebuild. And this is basically because we're a financial service industry or brand in the financial services. I told you, the most number one important aspect in a financial service brand is trust. You can't really let that trust dissolve. So when you talk about React, when people were locked down, they were really in tatters. They were like really wondering, what do I do? I mean, what's going to happen now? So we had to be a bit empathetic as a brand. So basically, I'm really glad to say, and one of the key things we did was, before even Central Bank came out with relief, moratoriums, and payment holidays, HSBC went out there a week before and said, look guys, look customers, we know you're in trouble. Don't worry about paying your credit cards. We'll give you a payment holiday. If you are impacted with a job loss, don't worry about it. We will give you a moratorium for 6 months. So I think obviously it came through the regulator, but I'm really, really glad to say that we went out in the market proactively even before the regulator said do this. I think that's the kind of way that you need to kind of react to something like this, because this is once in a lifetime challenge, right? We don't really see this coming every time. The second aspect, obviously, is we have to give them alternatives. So like what Tharaka said, they had to get Uber, right? Because you can't go to ATM and pull out cash, right? So we basically spoke and educated customers in terms of, here are the alternative channels you can use. Yeah, why do you want to go to an ATM? You are risking touch and sense, and you can be infected. Don't do that. Just do everything online. So luckily we have a customer base like what Tharaka said, where 60 to 70% of our base are online savvy. They do a lot of stuff on the internet. So that really helped us to kind of have the conversation. And the second aspect is respond. So during respond, what we did was we educated people. So all our communication campaign was not about giving credit card offers or doing giving special rates. It was about educating people in terms of, here is how you can use an alternate channel. Here is how you can use the new payment platform called, the government launched something called CEFs, Common Electronic Fund Transfer, where you can transfer real time up to $5 million. Why do you need to go to a bank? You can stay at home and do it, right? So these are the kind of education we did. And finally, we also had rebuild. So obviously we knew that the lockdown will pass and the dark clouds will pass, and we had to kind of get back to normal. So this is where we basically created endurance for the brand. And we basically came out with new products that will help the customer. And also we establish the brand because it's all about the long haul, right? So this is kind of what we did. And you guys will probably also remember we had a V, U, and a W curve of recovery. So we had to kind of build in. So let me give a quick example of what we really did. So during this pandemic, this lockdown, we basically, we command about 30% market share in the more affluent segment in Sri Lanka, which is HSBC Premier. And basically we took a decision that we will launch a new product during this time. And we went to the market and launched what we call Premier 2.0. It is a global kind of brand proposition, which we launched in Sri Lanka after 5 years. It's a refresh that we did. So it's really interesting that in the mass affluent space, imagine a lot of our consumers in Sri Lanka lost jobs, right? If you look at the professionals, they had pay cuts or they had a few job losses, right? Majority of them had pay cuts. I mean, people had 50% pay cuts here. So that's the kind of segment, obviously, that we were banking it. And we had to go and tell them, look, we are with you. And here's what we are doing about it. And some of these affluent customers had a massive impact. And that is basically their lifestyle was shattered. They couldn't go on overseas vacation. They couldn't go on local vacation. They can't go for dining. They can't go for shopping. They can't, that whole lifestyle shifted. I mean, people couldn't golf, people couldn't go and watch a rugby match, So all these lifestyle, more affluent, that's a big issue for an affluent customer. That was impacted. So basically, what we did was we launched HSBC Premier 2.0, and our brand promise was together we thrive. And that's kind of our HSBC global brand promise. And our tagline was what's interesting, irrespective of what's happening, we said HSBC Premier is for a life full of life. And that's the line that we came in. So essentially, what was the reasons to believe? So what we did was really what's interesting. So during this time, we said, you don't really technically have to come to the bank anymore because we are putting the brand or the product in your pocket. So we said bank in your pocket with HSBC Premier. And what that means is today you can do everything that you need, make payments, pay bills, do transfers, not in Sri Lanka, globally, whatever you want through your mobile banking. So why come to the bank? Right. So in this segment, it really makes. So one aspect, one key characteristic was bank in the pocket. And for that, all these years, if you come to the branch and you open an account, it takes about 3 to 4 days to get the account, the checkbook, everything, the debit card. But with this, we created a technological end-to-end platform, which made it easier for customers and faster for them to bank. Within 45 minutes, you get your mobile banking app in your mobile phone to start transaction. Why do you need the checkbook anyway, right? So that's the kind of change that we did. And believe me, this was during the pandemic. Right. We also then said the second aspect was borderless banking. And guess what? A lot of these affluent customers send their kids overseas. So we had to kind of give them a solution, because we said, look, we can open an account even before your kid goes overseas. In Sri Lanka, if you're going to UK and Australia, a lot of our children go to Australia or UK. So we can open an account from here. So these are some of the examples. And finally, the rewarding life was the third pillar. And we brought international, we didn't want to take the lifestyle off. So we brought in the international assets like, Brian Habana and Henrik Stenson. We kept that lifestyle piece going. We did our sponsorship, what we did. So we didn't go dark, guys. I think that's the most important thing. And that's basically, I think, all about trust. So if you keep trust, if you be relevant, I think that's basically very important in a service dimension.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunasekara. I think that was a very insightful answer, and I think I myself actually came across quite a few examples of how things were done over the past few months. And up next, now you mentioned of reaction. You mentioned of now in terms of your years of experience in the banking industry and banking sector. Obviously, keeping a customer is important, and customer misbehavior is something you've obviously might have come across. So my next question to you would be, what is the most common customer misbehavior that you've come across? And in times like this, especially, you might have actually come across more of this. So at times like this, what do you propose to do in terms of protecting the brand name and to keep these customers, to retain these customers with you? What do you propose you do?
Yeah, so I'd like to give a very brief answer. So basically, what is customer misbehavior is something that's probably in everyone's mind. So I think customer misbehavior is similar to what happens if you're confronted and somebody comes and wants to hammer you, right? So it's basically a fight or flight phenomena, right? So the reason that the customers create what is called a misbehavior or go off the track, take a school, for example, take a classroom, and when a teacher is teaching the class, there might be few students who are not paying attention, and they're probably playing around. That's the kind of element of misbehavior we're talking about. Does that really happen in the industry that we're talking about? What happened during the lockdown maybe was a trigger for misbehavior when it comes to customers as well. And the reason for that was it was a traumatic experience. So they really didn't think rationally, obviously, right? So that's why people kind of got off track. But I think what's important is that one of the ways that it manifested was we saw a lot of customers basically, venting on our social media platforms. I'm sure Tharaka and Dileep would have seen the same. And that was kind of really because they couldn't get through to maybe a call center or get through to someone in the bank. The branches are shut. So basically they were venting. They were basically, complaining excessively. We saw during this time in our social media. One thing also that happened from a behavior, creating a misbehavior in that context is people converged into online shopping. So what that did was there's also a huge opportunity for cyber attacks, and cyber security was a big question mark. So I think that's something that really also created that's how we're not a customer, but some opportunities taking control of our poor customer who's now online, suddenly wiping out his credit limit in a credit card. So these are some of the things that happen during the time. But I think customer misbehavior is not a huge issue definitely in banks. Did people pull out their deposits before the date? They didn't. Did people deliberately not pay their credit cards? I don't think so. I think we had amazing customers who said, sorry, we can't pay the card because I can't get out of my house. We said, that's fine. I told you about the whole empathy around this, right? So I think it's also, I think sometimes it's really amazing to see that. I mean, these are the times when you realize you have a fantastic customer base who are very loyal. It tests you as a brand. The loyalty is an indicator. And I think I'm sure all three of my colleagues and my good friends, speakers will agree that we had very little attrition. Right? Attrition was not even an issue. I mean, during a crisis, one of the biggest things is the leak in the bucket, the attrition. But did we have attrition? I don't think so. So I think that's kind of reality. But I think so. I would really have massive examples around misbehavior. But let me give you two examples of what happened. Right. So one is a similar example, not from a service angle, but it's a service element. So look at Nike, for example. Globally, Nike says just do it. Right. So unfortunately, people couldn't get out. People couldn't get out and exercise, right? So what Nike did was they actually created a campaign, especially in countries like China, saying, just don't quit. And they created an app which gives home exercise, right? And what happened was they had 80% increase in app download based on this during this lockdown time, just because they went and they were really relevant to that consumer, right? And another example is Harpic. I'm sure all of you guys have seen on pay TV Harpic being advertised heavily. Did they shut down, go dark in advertising? They didn't, right? And that's because they realized that today suddenly people are all family members are at home. And if you remember the famous Harpic example, when people are at home, they obviously use the toilet more than they should during a normal day. So that means that toilet has to be clean. So basically Harpic realized this important insight, and they actually kept on advertising and saying, clean your toilets, use Harpic. And guess what? That campaign, I've seen some data which is amazing, especially in India. It has an uplift. It uplifted a penetration of about 10.8 million households because of this just advertising effort and not going dark. And I mean, these are some of the examples I can quote, millions of examples. But I think important thing is, I don't think you can attribute misbehavior to a deliberate effort. It can be because it's traumatic, because it's, I mean, you got to have empathy towards the customers.
All right. My last question to you, Mr. Gunasekara, is now taking your attention away from the local scope and taking to international markets. What do you think is the best way or the best method to target the international market from a sales point of view?
Okay, so you're referring to a Sri Lankan company going overseas, right? I mean, that's what you mean by international. So if you look at the current crisis we are in, I think we had huge impact because our exports were impacted, right? So obviously our trade got impacted because people are not really doing the trade they used to. I mean, classic example is Singapore lost trade volumes of about 70 to 80% during the lockdown because that really couldn't happen. So if you look at going overseas, I think that's really where we also came and gave a lot of input and information. And we have a global think tank. We have HSBC Global Research, which talks about all these trends. I think there were really three important things, and that was one. Again, the consumer element. So how did the consumer in that particular market evolve or change? So you had to kind of attune to a different kind of format. Let me give you an example of Coca-Cola. I think Coca-Cola basically realized that people couldn't get out and come and purchase Coke as they did from their supermarket or mom and pop shop. So they had to get the Coca-Cola into the fridge or the refrigerator. So they basically created a campaign around what is called Coke to Home, right? And what they realized was, they didn't advertise. They took the mental space and they got more refrigerator space, right? So during that time, they basically increased their volumes by about 25% just by doing that, especially in some of the key markets like in India and Asia Pacific. So I think this is an example of how they actually a brand thought completely differently, and this is all international examples of that. And the second aspect is staying true to the brand. I think if you're going overseas, whatever happens, I think you got to basically have a brand. You have a brand purpose, as Dileep very clearly alluded to. That brand purpose has to stay true. whether it's on or off. I think classic example is look at Dilma, for example. So when Dilma, obviously they have 40% market share in Australia, for instance. So when the lockdowns happened, they created this whole aura around more a sustainability, social conscious type of brand, right? And they created, I think in Australia, they did some amazing work around how people had to change and, use tea differently and, stuff like that. So obviously, they evolved with it. So I think if you're a brand, I think you got to evolve with the situation. And third aspect is you got to do two things. One is look at the data trends and listen to the customer's voice. The customer's voice is very important because that's the only way you can listen to what's changing. So there's a famous Red Indian saying, which says, listen to the whispers. You might be able to avoid the screams. So if you can listen to some of those customer voice, KPIs, you probably can see what are the trends, what are the projections, what are the things that's going to snowball, etc. So I think listening to the customer and staying true to your brand, and also making sure that the trust is not undermined are three important things that you need to continue to do if you're in international markets as well. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Mr. Gunasekara. I think that concludes our session with you. I'd like to have all three of you speakers online at the same time right now. I have a few questions, keeping to our time constraints, to ask from all three of you, and you can each take your turn and answer them together as much as you can. So I believe we have Mr. Mudadeniya, Mr. Ranwala, and Mr. Gunasekara online with us right now. Thank you once again for being here with us, and we'd like to quickly take you through a few more common questions that you might answer in unison and in tandem. So firstly, I think we went through this with Mr. Ranwala as well, but now to take your attention onto social media and how important it has been in the current day and age. So it is very common knowledge to everyone that social media is an effective and perhaps the most effective way of communicating today. So what do you think is the best way to communicate and pass the message over social media at a time like this, or even in the future, whether it's graphical, whether it's audio, video? Anyone could please, if they can give an example, that would be really great.
Can I kick off? Yeah, sorry, Tharaka.
Yeah, go ahead, Tharanga, no problem.
Yeah, no, I think maybe I'm sure Tharaka and Dileep would. I've seen some amazing work from John Keels, so I'm sure Dileep also might agree with me. I think, as I mentioned, go back to the 3 R's I mentioned about it's being empathetic and also being and educating people. So I think one of the most important things is creating the right content and sharing it on social. So one of the things that we are doing is, because, for example, kids are locked in at home. If you go to our HSBC social media page, FB page, you will see we are doing a lot of educational stuff. So we are telling kids, how do you differentiate, between a need and a want, for example. What are the things that you need to think about? How do you do transactions? I mean, basic things. Financial literacy is the word I'm looking for. So I think basically we are imparting a lot of knowledge about financial literacy. And then also the second aspect is, it's sometimes you can't be one-dimensional, especially during because the attention span. So I think in marketing, there is an important thing we need to realize, and that is consumers have to be mentally available. And as a brand, we need to kind of grab that mental availability to impart our message. And if you don't do that, the message doesn't simply go through. So for that, we need to really look at a lot of new content, different multidimensional aspects of content that really resonates well with what's relevant to the consumer, and also which is timely. So there's no point talking about lockdown stuff now, because we have probably moved on from that. I think now it's about rebuilding. How do you move forward? What is the again? Remember that golden word I mentioned: resilience. It's all about resilience.
Can I just say, Tirana, I think Tharanga touched it quite well. Just a small fact. I think he was very correct. These age and time, what we need to do is use social media in a way so that you engage your customers, right? One of the things that even us that we did, we moved into what we call the edutainment side. We got both the children and the parents, both from an education point of view, but then you brought entertainment into it. See, I think one of the things that I see from a local brand perspective, maybe Tharanga and them from an international brand perspective, they do that, is that I think a lot of us have not got into this gaming kind of thing just as yet, right? And I think I would love to see the time when a local bank can do that and do, because that's where your real engagement is. So I think this pandemic allowed all of us to try those things. I don't think it was not for this, probably we would have waited for a long time. But I think Dileep may add on, because that's a brand who has been doing these kind of things time and again, because they are in the both leisure as well as in the entertainment sort of giving that value to people. But then I think from a banking perspective, I think this is what we have been doing, and I think that entertainment side is what has been improved, and we have had a lot of engagement happening, both the young and the old. And what we have seen is that we have got a certain audiences or certain set of customers who we never thought would probably be with us or part of our brand ethos attaching to us as a result of this Tirina. And before I probably give Dileep this thing, there is a very interesting question I see, Tirina, which you might take as we go on, about social media and the moratorium. If you don't mind, I can answer it when you want to take that up.
Right. I think I think we all agree that it's very important to have this consumer, what we're looking at, a consumer engagement with the brand. That's very critical. So what we try to do is that rather than just to put a post to see whether actually through currently the lead media is what we look at as video. It's in terms of video, what we've seen is that more authentic videos has actually larger possibility and probability of being shared and engaged. I'll give you a very a small example. We had this celebrity Richard Quest who was coming in, and then he was going to latest difficulty. We actually agreed him to climb Sigiriya. And then while we go around and we stop, so while the cameras are set, expensive production units, discussion, directors all set it up at the beginning of Sigiriya to capture his visit. He was a little thirsty, and then he sat on a road with his small shop around just close to Sigiriya. And then he was basically said, let's have a king coconut. And he was basically, somebody was cutting it. And then he was trying to get, so I thought it's a nice moment. I just filmed through my iPhone. I'm not a camera director or anyone, just my iPhone, switch on and film that. And then the whole thing, he's cutting and he's drinking. And remind you that this is the movie, this is the film which has the highest amount of views and shares, etc. Not because I filmed it, because the content that was there was very authentic. He was cutting, and Richard was coming to Sri Lanka, cutting a king coconut, drinking and enjoying it and commenting on it. And that's the moment to capture. And those moments are very difficult to schedule and shoot. So the time that we actually had these expensive directors coming in, doing storyboards, try and create something, those things are actually changing. Unfortunately, sometimes it's a small phone. Authentic information, authentic content seems to be what is actually being going viral. And creation, as Tharanga also mentioned, creation of that content is going to be the strategy, or it's going to be the skill that the organizations are looking for. And then such actually a lot of new posts are being created. We call it, chief relationship officer and etc. So that you chief content officer has been created now to do that. That is one aspect. Second thing is, there's something very interesting recently with all these issues. When all the major brands, when they want to close down their shops around the street, and Victoria's Secret especially, they actually used a very interesting formula, and that is something to be looked at. Now we all know that when you do social media post, we look at how many likes, how many shares, what is the engagement rate, and then what's your total number of likes that you have, and you get an engagement rate, and then we also look at impressions. If you look at an impression, the definition of an impression, it can be a 1 fraction of a second appearance of your brand or name when somebody's on the screen. That's the classical definition of an impression. Now it can be one fraction of the second. Now you have a cost for that. But in the meantime, you look at it by having a shop. They look at it, when you're having in a high street, people do come to the shop. They spend some time. They look at it, they touch and they feel. There's a certain amount of time they spend with engage in the brand. So that could be a 45 minutes, half an hour and 40 minutes. So if you look at, if you give a value of X amount of dollars per impression, and then if that is a one fraction of the second, if you take the same value and multiply by the number of hours of engagement that person has in a shop or while an event that is created by 2 hours or 3 hours, that gives you a direct impression, direct correlation between an online and an offline activation. And this actually start opening the eyes of so many brands, and they change the formula completely, because today's days and age, what is looking for is a brand engagement, whether it's coming from online and offline, so that the people will recollect and people will experience the brand so that it will hit them so that they can consume later on. So those are the two things that I like to highlight on there.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think that answers our question very much. And lastly, the last common question I'd like to ask all three of our guest speakers before we move in for the question and answer session would be on the importance of after sales. And in your opinion, with regards to your industry, what do you think are the common things to do for after sales service?
That's an interesting one. I guess in a banking sense, what does after sales kind of look like? So I mean, essentially, I know it happens in like white goods or brown goods or something like that. You take a device home, then obviously you rely on the warranty and so on. But how does it really happen in the service dimension? So if you really look at services, I think we have to talk about the lifetime value of customers. So in banking, I'm sure Tharak will agree. We basically have a opportunity where we can bank a person from the womb to the tomb, right? So from the day the person is born till the person is a person's death, we can bank them. So imagine after sales service in that context. So I think it's absolutely important when it comes to financial services, because if you can win as a child, as a teenager, as a youngster, as a professional, as a young adult, as a father, as a retiree, and as a a person that who's probably living the last phase of life, the important phase of life as well, you obviously need to be relevant. You have to have propositions. You need to really be kind of evolving your products and services, and obviously staying true to your brand, and doing what you have to do to kind of make that customer happy. I guess that's probably after sales in a financial service industry.
Yeah, if I may just add, I guess Tharanga covered it well. I think the only other thing that I can probably say is the after sales from a banking perspective would be how effectively you can upsell and cross sell also. For example, how satisfied you are as an existing customer, which will allow the bank to upsell and cross-sell. Actually, what Tharanga touched was also on a upselling and a cross-selling perspective, because you, from the womb to the tomb, you won't go if you can't keep adding products in. So I think from a banking perspective, it's more the upsell and the cross-sell. Again, we come back to the essence of what all three of us said: being true to your brand and being authentic will allow service brands to be relevant, as well as provide more businesses day in, day out. I think that's where it stands.
Right. I think in a hotel context, what is in terms of the after sales service is that we basically look at it from a loyalty programs, so that you talk to whenever you consume that you have been recognized, and the loyalty programs are driving towards the repeat purchase. That's one strategy that is adopted. The other one is actually the data, customer data that we have. Then we basically use it for various analytics. We use the CRMs, and then through the CRM that we start creating values. Especially we are in service marketing. They are perishable. It's a perishable item. Whether you give it a room for 30% discount or 80% discounts on the one day before does not make anything any big difference. But if you're for the selling before, it's an issue. But the just day before, which is going to be anyway perished. So as a result of that, those what you call distress inventory can be pushed through a very sophisticated, well-organized CRM program based on the repeat purchases, based on the customers who have consumed your product, and that is a value addition. So we always can say, look here, you have been with us in the past, you have actually come to various places, you have spent so much of time with us. So in this, we'd like to give you 50% off or 70% off in recognition of the patronizing our brand. And that's kind of a sales, after sales kind of a service that you practice in the hospitality industry.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think that concludes the common general questions that I'd like to ask all three of you. And with that, I'd like to move into the final segment for this evening's session, that is the Q&A session. And we've got a few almost 5 to 6 questions that we received from our audience, who we are much thankful for joining with us this evening. I think the first question, in fact, that I will be presenting to you three gentlemen this evening can be answered by Mr. Gunasekara and Mr. Ranwala. The first question that we received this evening is how retail banks can keep the lights on during COVID-19 and recalibrate for the future. Any thoughts?
Tilina, if you don't mind, I would like Tharanga to take that on, because I think in his session he articulated very well. And I would like, rather than elaborating it more, I would like to take the next question, which is again on the retail banking, and it's an item. So let's let Tharanga take the first question, and maybe I'll take the second one.
Of course, Mr. Ranwala.
Yeah, so I think the classic example is, how the bank needs to kind of, change course. So you can't really stay true to the kind of brand. Let me give an example. So about 2 years ago, we dug up all our data, and we probably have, we definitely lead in the card space. We introduced credit cards in a big way, commercialized cards in Sri Lanka as a brand. And one of the things we realize is in a certain, we obviously look at segmentation based on various aspects, and we found that the segment that we are targeting with one of our credit cards, essentially 40% of their spend was in everyday spend. So they were swiping their cards for, say, supermarkets and telecommunication, paying their mobile bill, data bills, and then fuel. So we basically created a product around it, and it was called the Cashback Card. So in Sri Lanka, we launched the first Cashback Card. So what we said was, because you spend 40% of your spend every day on everyday spend, here is something we want to give back, and you don't really need to wait for a discount. And that's how the cashback really works. So we gave 10% cashback every time you swipe your card in these three categories. And what we kind of found is that during the crisis, luckily for us, what did consumers do? Yeah, so that 60% of that other spend really disappeared, because they couldn't go on holidays, they couldn't buy overseas, they couldn't actually go overseas on holiday, they couldn't really do the typical lifestyles things, the luxury things, buying some nice apparel, etc. Good question. I always ask this question. I can go to a place, get something on discount, and buy something for myself, example. But where do I buy it to? Tharaka, we haven't met for like what, 1 year? Our social life has completely tatters. So we don't really need to flaunt anything. My daily wear is now a t-shirt because I work from home. So obviously, what really happened was that 40% spend really even expanded. So people are buying buying groceries through their credit card. They didn't stop that. They were paying more data bills and more mobile bills, because people are, imagine if you have 2 kids and your family, suddenly 4 people are working at home, which never happened before, right? So sometimes your kid would borrow the father's laptop or the mother's laptop, and suddenly you have a need for a laptop for your kid. You would have probably had 400 GB for all 4 of them during a normal time. Suddenly you need 1000 GB because everyone's downloading Netflix, everyone's downloading, the data consumption happens. So obviously you have to change course a bit. So I think from a retail banking point of view, I guess what's important is looking at the data. And I think sometimes when you only look at data, I'm sure Tharaka will also agree, he's very mature in this area, I can tell you. I think sometimes it takes the gist off in terms of emotion. You look at the data, it's very functional, it's very formal. I mean, it only tells what it can tell. But what we need to also bolt on to that is the emotional element. Yeah. So for example, if a customer can't get cash into his hand to buy some fruits and give it to his family, there's an emotional disconnect there as a brand, right? So I think that's kind of, that probably the data doesn't tell you, because it's probably not in the data realm, right? So obviously, I think it's all about being resilient and being, obviously changing course. I think that's very important.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Gunasekara. I think we'd straight away move into our second Q&A question that was presented to us by TD Mel. Now he has asked, we had customers who were not eligible for moratoriums using social media to criticize the bank. Yes, we can move them to the inbox and communicate to them, but the negative comment would have driven poor word of mouth. What methods would you suggest to minimize these kinds of situations? Mr. Ranwala?
Yeah, Thirana, actually, I think it's a very timely, pertinent question, and I would say this is the banker's nightmare, right? You have a situation, you have a customer who is not eligible, but he is going on the social media, rampaging the bank, basically giving the impression that the bank has been caught with his pants down, but the situation is not the case. However, the problem with the bank is you can now respond on the common platform because you have the customer bank secrecy issues at hand. But see, my answer is this. You can actually take him to inbox and respond, but what happens is everybody else is now thinking, okay, look, this guy said, look, this is very bad of this bank. My recommendation is you need to go, you can approach it two ways. One, you handle it offline, right? But your second problem then won't get solved. The other way to handle is that you respond to him with a common answer to the effect, telling him how does the bank's COVID moratorium works, right? Now I'll give you a classic example. Say a customer is not eligible because he is not in the tourism related sector, which is given the COVID moratorium. So you say, dear so and so, banks have COVID moratoriums given who falls into these following criteria. And then you give the technical criteria, which is not a secret, which is available on the web. And then you say, however, if a customer do not fall into this particular category or criteria as set out by the regulators, unfortunately, banks are not in a position to offer this COVID. And then you use very tactfully as probably an example. For example, say this customer is not eligible because he is distributing water bottles and says that it is related to tourism, right? Which is not. You can say, for example, if you have a company which sells water bottles, but you think that it is, and you're giving it to hotels, but it doesn't fall into the tourism category as stipulated by the legislator, then you will not be given. So what are you doing? You're giving an example, probably out of the normal thing, but you are tilting it towards the relevant person so that he gets the message. Some subtlety have to be used, and you have to use your common sense also. But that is one way to get back at your customers and to make sure that you send the message across. Because at the end of the day, the common people look at the general sense and then come to conclusions without knowing the facts. But then the bankers cannot give the facts. So my answer to that, it's a nightmare. So you need to tackle it very, very effectively and very sensibly. So one way to look at it is you go on the common platform, but you give an indication to the effect, okay, this can be one of the examples, but you're not divulging any confidential information. So that's, I think, one way to handle it, Tirina, in a situation like this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ranwala. I hope that answers the question from our viewers. And now I'd like to take our attention on to Mr. Mudadeniya. You touched base on point where you spoke about CRMs earlier when I asked that common question. So we have received one question asking you, how do you use CRMs to improve your service in the current situation?
Yeah, I think, okay, so this is what happens. First of all, as a brand, you need to look at forward thinking. And as a result of the way that you operate, your brand or your business will start getting a lot of data points. A huge amount of data that is actually accumulated from various touch points, starting from pre-purchases, during and after. It can be web, it can be from a point of sales, it can be from a loyalty programs, etc. This huge amount of data as a brand that you should basically have a decent amount of analytics that goes into this. Now, the analytics is very easy to say, you put all this data and then, you extract something as a data pool and data warehouse and bring it up. But it's a very, very tedious job. And we, for example, as a group that we have looked at it and then we are making a lot of efforts into put this data and understand the consumer behavior into great extent. So once you have this data into various ways of analyzing it, you will see a certain trends that comes in. So we call it basically areas or the gaps that which not have been met, or the opportunities that can created on this. So as a result, we can actually start developing packages which are relevant to the consumer and then coming out and actively marketing it. So this is all about gathering data, analyzing and looking at what the gap and opportunities and start working on it. So we looked at it in, for example, I can give you an example. Sometime back, we looked at it, a lot of Sri Lankans are actually not traveling on the weekday. It's like looking at whether the bottle is half empty or half full. So then we saw this as an opportunity. The research was done, the proposition was actually made, and then we most probably will go to the market soon with that. And then you create a demand which actually can give a very fantastic offers during there's a work from home scenario, there's active blue collar and white collar people actually on retired staff that are there who wants to travel on the weekday. People don't want to actually gather too much on weekends, but prefer to go on a weekday and come in extended weekends offers. So all this actually coming as a result of a continuous analysis of data that coming into place. So the CRM is a component of that. So that what you do is you plug in all the information of a data, and then you have a customer relationship management program where you can actually actively engage more customized data or customized activation for that particular person, looking at their behavior, looking at their likes and dislikes, so that when somebody comes to the hotel recognizes, the last time this person asked for this newspaper, he wants a coffee with 1 sugar, he wants basically like this kind of food, etc., so that you prepare it and keep it without frequently guests, so that you understand the behavior of the customer well, so you delight the customer use that. So you can actually, as Tharaka also mentioned, upsell, cross-sell, and also actually sell more, and then also actually delight the customers by giving them that information required through the well-deserved CRM. And sometimes these things doesn't have to be very expensive investments. It's true that proper CRM, a proper investment in a systems like that may cost you little money, but you also can do simple exercise, simple observations to start with, rather than getting into more complicated analytics. You can do some in-house analytics first, and then move on to the rest of it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mudadeniya. I'd like to ask you one last question just before we move on to asking one more question from the two banking gentlemen. Mr. Mudadeniya, we've received a question asking, at times like this, given the current circumstances and these trying times that all of us are going through, how do we measure attrition or real customer difficulty in the behavior of buying?
Customer attrition is not something we can measure at this time. It's not that they are unable to buy. Basically, they are unable to consume a product, or in this case a service, as a result of the external environment. So that doesn't mean that people don't want to travel. Today, if I be constantly looking at it, when Hong Kong and a few other countries actually try to say they are open, the Google searches actually, their curve went as actually doubled on the other side of a V. And same with Dubai. So when we are constantly analyzing the travel related behavior online, and we see the latent demand that is available for it. So we need to be patient and be have faith on the product, and wait till the right moment that comes in, so that people will start buying it. So that's why you have to constantly communicate, ensure that your service that you provide is actually up to date, and your precautions and safety measures are there, so there is a credibility in the eyes of the consumer, and when you're ready, and we will be able to push the product in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mudadeniya. I think we are in time for one last question just before we wind up this evening's proceedings. It's been quite a day. It's been quite a very informative and insightful session. So my last question, I think this will go to Mr. Ranwala and Mr. Gunasekara. We've received a question that says, what is the prudential treatment of loans impacted by COVID-19?
Well, I think if Tharanga is okay, I'll let me go first.
Please.
It's a very broad question, right? I think what the person is trying to find is basically how do you get the moratoriums sort of looked at from a loan perspective, and see how do you see who is eligible and who is not eligible, and then how do you make use of that? I think that's what they're trying to ask. See, there are two things. I think first is a technical part, meaning what the regulators have laid down, what criterion and what kind of criteria and yardsticks that need to be taken when you basically get a loan to be classified as a moratorium affected loans. Then comes the other part. That's technical. So you have the various things which is given, what sector you are in, how you have been impacted, and what kind of moratoriums that can be given. For some, it is more than 1.5 years for like tourism. The others maybe 6 months. So that's the technical part. Then the other one is that what is it that you can do as bankers, as the potential treatment that you can do for the impacted businesses. Again, I would say that is two parts. Mostly this is from a credit perspective. The first part is that you need to see how those companies have been impacted due to this pandemic. Is it because there is no revenue that is generation as a result of certain inflows that is coming in, or is it because that people are not using that particular services as a result of the pandemic? Now, those are two different things. For example, if you look at John Keels or the leisure industry, today their revenues have dropped not because they have done anything wrong or they don't have anything that can be given. It's because people can't travel, people can't use hotels, people can't go on holidays. So what happens is, as a result of people are unable to use the services, you have been impacted that way. Then again, you look at things like buying white goods or buying say electronic goods and all that. People are postponing it because you have other important things to do. So the two different companies or the industries has to deal with it differently. The first thing that a lending institution does is to look at the kind of industry or the segment they are in, and to find out what is the kind of cash flows you are looking at the next 1 year, maybe 18 months, or the next 24 months. Then what you do is that you do that cash flow in a way where you see, given the current context, you arrive at the worst case scenario and do up the planning to see how you could restructure and refacilitate the kind of facilities that is given to these industries. So that's what generally from a credit perspective, what people would do. However, at the same time, I think one of the problems that the industries face is that banks need to ask for collateral or securities when you do that. And people may ask why. The simple answer to that is what the banks lend to people are what they take from the depositors. So we, as much as we have obligation towards making sure the companies go on with this difficult time, we have ownership to the depositors as well. So that banks need to have a balance. So those are the kind of tough decisions that the banks need to make. and then look at it from a point of view of how you analyze their cash flow. And then banks actually have set up, I'm pretty sure most of the other banks also have what you call the nurturing unit. So those nurturing units keep working with these suffered industries and make sure they go through this difficult time. And while they do that, there are concessions given over and above the moratoriums that is given. There are stretching up of various facilities that is there, allowing them new businesses that is there, because I saw another question that is there, how do we capitalize on this on B2B? Again, allowing banks to take a role to support these industries by joining other businesses that they have like-minded within the banks, and then patching it up together. So you have B2B businesses. So all these things is to help and nurture these troubled industries that is there. And those are some of the potential treatment that the banks do. You can keep talking about so many things, but those are in essence what the banks would probably do.
I think Tilina, you're on mute.
Sorry, Mr. Gunasekara, would you like to shed some light on this?
Yeah, I think Tharaka covered it brilliantly. So I don't really have to add much. I think he kind of emphasized the credit aspect of it. I mean, so obviously that's a different angle. But if you look at it from a marketer's point of view, I think the first point in when it comes to any kind of forbearance or moratorium or payment holiday or that whole empathy perspective is showing that intent. So I think it's important that you kind of so for example, you have a credit card base who suddenly can't pay. So essentially it's about reaching out to them and asking, do you need help? So I think that's the first starting point. So I think that ticks a huge box in the customer's trust. And then the second aspect is, what kind of help do you need? I mean, I'm keeping it very simple. And then asking, the customer how they have been impacted. So I think you can do a lot to kind of gather that data before you make those, very prudent financial decisions in terms of how to treat it, how it appears in your P&L, all those things. So I think the marketer definitely has a role because he's the voice of the customer in the bank or in the organization. So I think he needs to bring these customers' voice to the table.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunasekara. I think we are coming to an end of this evening's session. I think, we have a few more questions, but I think we have run out of time, unfortunately, and hopefully Slim will be able to get through to some of these questions. But if not, thank you very much to all our viewers for joining in on this session. It has been a very informative and very eye-opening discussion with these three gentlemen this evening, and a big thank you from all of us here at Slim to the three speakers this evening, Mr. Dileep Mudadeniya, Mr. Tharaka Ranwala, and Mr. Tharanga Gunasekara. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining with us this evening and sparing your time on a Saturday evening like this to actually, catch up on stuff like this and, join with the audience and keep things going. Thank you very much once again, gentlemen, for sparing your time and joining with us this evening. Thank you to Slim for organizing this event and giving me the chance to actually moderate it. It has been a pleasure. Until we meet again, I believe that's all from us here at Slim. Do make sure to keep in touch with Slim on their Facebook page and any other method and any other social media. Thank you once again, gentlemen, for joining with us this evening. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. My name is Tilina Udayaratna, and that's all we've got for you this evening, folks. Until next time, thank you very much once again for joining with us. Take care and be safe.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.